Alright everyone, welcome back to another video here at Seb's Garage. In the last video, you might have seen me unbox this lovely set of S3 coilovers for the new build, the Silver GD3. In this video, we're going to go in-depth into how to install a set of coilovers, particularly a divorce type rear, on a Honda Fit. I've seen a ton of cars that I've worked on or ridden in that have had quality coilovers that rode like absolute crap because they weren't set up properly or installed properly, and some very minor things will make a huge difference in the way your car rides. Now, this is not going to be for a motorsports application. There's a really good video by our buddy Sash over there, so check out my man's. He went into detail about how to do it for a motorsports application with helper springs and everything properly set up to go on track, get good times, and have maximum grip. This will be for a nice sporty daily setup. Something that I like to do is more on the comfort side, but it still handles very well. It does leave some grip on the table. It does leave some performance on the table as far as how I go with my installation process, but it is what I have found to be the best riding method of coilover installation on a divorce setup. So let's get into it. First, we will go over what comes in the box of coilovers for a Fit and what each thing does and how it operates. The number one thing I see people do wrong on these is the fronts. You'll see that it comes with a hat, but nothing holding it in place. And they don't install this with the factory bearing, which you do need to reuse. And then they have problems with this, popping off or not staying in place or whatever. So make sure that you are utilizing the factory bearing. We will see that in more detail when we do the installation procedure. The other thing is each coilover manufacturer is different about the rear perch. These, let me get these out of the way, say very clearly here, reading is key, folks. These are meant to be at the top. My case ports are at the bottom. So make sure that you read the instructions that come with the coilovers, and if you don't know, ask. And then the other thing that people usually don't do, and one of the biggest reasons why these cars ride like crap a lot of the time, the shock needs to be adjusted for your ride height. They are independent adjustments. Ride height is done with the spring, and then droop travel is done with the shock. This is why your car rides like crap 99% of the time. So let's get the car torn apart, get the factory stuff off of this, and put on some nice stuff. All right, as far as the installation procedure goes, or the disassembly, I'm not going to go super into detail. You guys have seen me do this a bunch, and if you haven't, it's really easy. You've got two bolts right here. You got to make sure you undo your brake line. I like to undo the axle nut so that I don't hyperextend the axle, because if you do, that's a pain in the ass to try to get back in place. And after that, it's just the one bolt up top, and then the whole assembly just drops out. I'm going to time-lapse it real quick for you guys, and then we'll get into installing this properly. Alright, we got everything out of the suspension here. Got a fresh KYB and H&R, which will also be for sale. Full set of 4. Let me know if you're interested. But now we're going to do the thing that you shouldn't do. Absolutely do not try this at home. I am a trained professional. And we're going to zip this off right here. So we got to harvest the bearing. With a lowering spring, this won't go flying. Still, use a spring compressor. With a stock spring, I wouldn't be trying this so comfortably. Sometimes they get a little stuck and they need a little help. What we'll do is just remove the whole thing. Like that. And then pop this off and get at it from underneath. Give me a second. We have salvaged the bearing. This one's OEM. I always tell people, get OEM. The KYB ones don't really tend to last. I haven't tried any of the other aftermarket ones, but OEM do seem to be the best for these. Otherwise, they start to get crunchy and start making weird noises when you're turning. We've got the front left, right there, front left. Coilover. Gonna have to take all of these little top portions off. Pretty cool. These have little rubber grommets on both sides of the spring. They have taken pretty good caution to make these comfortable for everyday use, which I appreciate. It is a 17, which I don't have, so give me a second to grab that. All right, we're gonna remove this. And then there's two bushings here, which is a little different than what I'm used to. So we'll see how this comes together. I assume that they're spacers. Yeah, it looks like they're spacers. And then I want to see how they sit. This guy, every coilover is a little bit different. Looks like it sits like that. Yep. Okay. So we'll have the top, and then the bushing only takes one. It looks like one comes off, one goes on. This guy sits in there. Yep. And then we put the nut back on. Actually, I think this is going to reuse the factory nut. Let me go grab that factory nut. I should probably read instructions. Alright, didn't come with any instructions, but I'm kind of looking at things. It looks like I'll be using both of the little spacers that it comes with. So this can come all the way down. I don't love that this doesn't sit up here on its own. So if the spring were to get loose, it seems like the little top piece could potentially also do some weird stuff. So I'm going to have at least some sort of preload on this, which is okay. This is the type of coilover you would want to run with the helper spring if you did want additional droop. But again, that is for a motorsports application setting and not what we are doing today. So we are going to use the factory nut. These coilovers do all use the same thread pitch as what the factory struts use, just because it has to go through that upper bearing and mount, and those are all the same size. So once the bearing is in place, we are going to use our little through wrench. Excuse me, I'm still getting over a bug that's been absolutely kicking my butt. And I should have a 19 right here. And then this one, instead of an Allen, it has a little cutout for a 10 mil. So we do that. And we tighten that up. Reuse the factory bushing like that. And then that will get sandwiched in the car like so. And use the supplied nut for the top. Or you can use a factory one, which might be a little bit tall for the adjuster. So we'll see. I'll probably use the one that was included just because it's serrated and probably will have a little bit of a better lock on that top portion. So let's throw this in. All right, this is just kind of hanging out in there loosely. When you are putting this together, make sure that you've got this top portion facing the proper way. It's got like the slotted portion towards the bottom so that it's kind of like a cup for that nut to sit into. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to lift this up like that to make it easier. Tighten that nut up and then we'll go from there. Once this one is tightened up, this should center as you do it. The one that's underneath here, the one that's at the top of the coilover, is angled. so it's concentric and it'll center itself. This should have a good bit of thread showing, about an inch or so. Most coilovers I've done are that way. The only ones that haven't been that way is when you're using an aftermarket top hat like the TCS plates that I've got on my black car. That takes up about an inch of threads, and also makes it so that your coilover has to like sit lower to be at the same ride height. It's a whole thing. Again, motorsports application type stuff. This is for fun daily drivers. So now that the top is done, we're gonna move on to the bottom section here. Let me see if I can make this be less of the sun. There we go. Now you can see a little bit better. I like to leave all this loose while we get things installed. So bottom perch loose. This is loose. Spring is loose. It's got pre-play. So the next thing's gonna be getting this guy on here. We will be reusing the bottom OEM bolt, and the top will be an adjustable camber bolt. I like doing it that way because you do have adjustment not only on the coilover, but fine adjustment by turning the camber bolt. And then you still have a trusty OEM bolt at the bottom. You can get slightly more camber by running an aftermarket one here. Also, I don't like doing that from a safety perspective. If you wanted more camber, what you can do is actually grab a little die grinder and slot this hole out more, and you'll have better results that way. But for now, we're gonna see how much camber we can get out of that before making any modifications. So let me go ahead and get this thrown together. You see this absolute disaster of tools everywhere? Well, that's because I did the thing I told you not to do, and hyperextended the axle, had to take everything apart, take apart the axle itself, get all the cuffs to go back in, repack the axle. Now I gotta get a new one of these little guys to hold the boot in place on a larger end. And yeah, after battle, it's in. I still have the spring loose up in here. Get you up in there. And all of these aren't adjusted. None of that gets done just yet. I had to get all that together. And when you are installing this, it also makes it a lot easier. If I can get you in here. That control arm bolt right there, loosen that. It'll give the control arm a lot more free range of movement. And you want to clock that with the weight of the car on it when you're done anyway. So we'll leave that undone. Let's not forget that guy. Sway bar end leg is enough for the time being. But now that it's actually in place, I've also adjusted it to as much negative camber as possible, because that's how I'm going to run this setup for grip. But now that that all is done, I'm going to clean up this mess a little bit, and then we'll get to doing some adjustment. Now that everything's back together, including that pesky axle that didn't want to cooperate with me, I've gone ahead and also installed the brake line in there. We've got the ABS sensor hooked up. You'll see that these are loose. The sway bar end link is not connected, and the spring has play. So the first thing we're going to do is set the preload. Let me show you how to do that. All right, the big preload debate. There's so much information and misinformation about this online. The number one thing you don't want to do is to lower the car by doing this and having a bunch of free play in there. What that's going to do is not only make the spring noisy on here, these do have the isolators, which is going to help with that if it ever came to it, but it's also going to put the shock travel in the wrong position and make the ride quality absolutely crap. So do not do that. The proper way to do preload, and this is kind of dependent on every coilover, it's sort of universal as far as what the measurement is, but certain brands want you to have like 2-3 mils, some want like closer to 1/4 inch. It depends really on your situation. Again, this is for street driving, not a specific motorsports adjustment. There are separate videos on how to do that, but this is what you want to do. Spring all the way up. Move the collar until it's barely making contact. And you feel a little bit of resistance. And that's it. See, that's still a little loose. That's good there. So I'm going to go ahead and lock that in place. And then we're going to do ride height. Now this is considered zero preload just because we've not actually compressed the spring any. If your coilover manufacturer called, say, for 5 millimeters of preload, then what you would do is you would take a measurement here between these two, like that. Actually, it'd probably be easier on this side here. we take a measurement like that, come in here and see what that number is. This is coming out to right at 50. And if we needed 5, we'd move this up to 55, lock this bottom one in place temporarily, move this up until it reaches that measurement. That would be 5 millimeters of preload. For this in particular, I'm going to leave it at 0. I like the way that this rides, or at least how other coilovers on fits have ridden, doing it this way. And it's not very often that you're lifting a front wheel, so not really necessary to have a whole lot of preload on the front here. That spring is never going to just be bouncing around. Other than that, now we're going to set ride height. So ride height is done with the bottom one. We're going to do this, just make sure that that one's loose, and we're going to spin from this here to get a measurement on the threads that are showing here. Now, I've already got a sort of close measurement that I think is what I'm going to be using, which for me is going to be 60 millimeters of thread here. So I'm going to have to move this another 10 millimeters upwards. So I'm going to have to move this to the left side like that to wind it out of the base and bring the coilover, or actually the hub on the coilover, down until I've got an extra 10 millimeters. So I will see you once I am done spinning this. Okay, we got this down to 60 millimeters. That fits nice and snug. I'm going to go ahead and tighten that one up with this guy, and you want to make sure that you get those nice and tight. I've had these come loose on the car, and then there's play between the actual shock body and the mount, and this whole thing gets loose and starts knocking and making weird noises, and it's really just all that, and it makes you think your whole car's gonna fall apart. But make sure you get these nice and tight. And then if you live in the Midwest, there's also a product you can use to coat the threads so that they don't get corroded. I believe it's made by Amsoil. I'll have to look that up and then let you guys know. But anything to kind of protect the threads. I don't like using like anti-seize on this, just because it ends up getting on your hands and all goopy and gets everywhere and you end up looking like Tin Man. But that product is pretty good. I suppose you could also use something like fluid film. That probably wouldn't be a bad idea. But now I'm going to go ahead and connect the sway bar link. The easiest way to do that here is turn the coil over, pop it in place, and you see how we turn it the opposite way and it sucked it right in. Then we throw the nut on. Excuse my phone going off. Apparently I am popular today. And then that's actually going through very nicely. Man, working on Southern cars is so nice. I'm used to the Chicago crap where nothing ever wants to work like it should and everything's corroded. So if you don't have a set of these are amazing. The gear wrench little through things, I think Milwaukee also makes a set. But we go like this. You put the Allen in the middle to hold it in. And I need a little more torque. And just like that, that one's nice and tight. So now we're going to put the wheels back on and look at some ride height. Alright, now we're going to get onto the rear of the car, which is where I find a lot of people have problems just because it's a divorce setup. What that means is that the shock and the spring aren't combined. They don't go into each other like they would in a traditional coilover. They are separate from each other. So they are placed, you know, the shock goes back here and the spring goes a little bit inboard more. It can make things just a little bit more tricky to adjust, but it's really not that complicated once you understand the initial concept. So let's first get this installed, and then I'll show you how to adjust them. So when I removed everything from the car, I just went ahead and did Control-Alt-Delete the whole thing. This particular set of coilovers, every brand is a little bit different, but it comes with isolators for the spring on each side. So you've got one of these little rubber pieces here. You've got another one right here where it meets the adjuster, and then you've got another one where the cup meets the chassis. On this particular brand also, there's a tag right here that says that it points up. Some are this way, some are that way. Depends on the brand that you're installing. If the manufacturer doesn't specify, shoot them an email, ask online. Doesn't, I think, mean or make that much a difference. It's mostly just the inner ID because they're slightly different. But what I like to do is before the shock goes in, get this put on. I already know sort of, kind of, an initial measurement for the coilover based on what I did on the other side and taking some very rough measurements between my black car and the other car. So I'm just going to dial the space here between, give me a second here, not enough hands, not an octopus, wish I was Squidward. So I'm going to dial in this measurement to 15 millimeter just because I think that that's going to be a good starting point for how low I want to be, and then pop this in the car. I've got my caliper tool set to 15 millimeter. It fits in there with just very slight amount of wiggle. I am not going to lock this in place. There will be further adjustments once the car's on the ground, and we roll the suspension back and forth, put some weight on it. It's going to settle afterwards. This might still need some tweaking for the way I'm going to do it on this car just because I'm doing a lot of work on it on and off. I'm going to let it settle with time and moving the car around before I go and get in alignment. But if you're doing it at home, I'll show you a good way to get that mostly dialed in before everything really settles. So once that's done, I've got the isolator that's going to go towards the top. We've got the one that goes in between and the rubber one at the bottom. And I'm just going to go ahead and plop this whole assembly, which you might not be able to see because the muffler's in the way. But I'm going to plop this whole assembly in. Oh, come on. We're right there. There we go. So that whole thing is on. And then we move on to the shock. All right, time to get a little bit technical, a little scientific, but I'm still gonna be me, so I'm gonna try to not be, you know, too nerdy. So the way you set your ride height is going to be with the spring. The way that you set your droop will be with the shock. The shock, depending on where it's at, will limit the travel of the rear beam. What I mean by that is if the shock is adjusted all the way up, it's not gonna let the beam come all the way down. And if it's adjusted the other way, all the way up, it's going to constantly be riding on the very upper part of the shock travel, and it might even be limiting how far the entire beam can go up. You might be riding on bump stops the entire time if it's adjusted badly enough, and that is where your terrible ride quality will come from. You got to make sure that this matches that. Now, you might ask yourself, how are you going to do all of that? How do I know if it's adjusted properly? Well, I'm going to give you a couple simple tricks. There's always going to be some fine adjustments, some things we're going to have to do as we set everything in place, but this is going to be a great starting point. You'll see right now I've installed this and it's loose. You see that there's space between the gasket and the body right here. You can see that flopping around, and also between it and the spring. What we want to do is when we install the shock right here and we tie it into the bottom, right underneath here, right here. I don't know if you can see my finger right there. When we do that, we want the shock to hold this right here. You see that difference? So we want the shock to limit this so that it doesn't flop around. So let me go ahead and get this on, and then I'll give you a better view of it from the backside. Another small tip here, when using the rubber bushings, remember these are the ones that came from the factory, you have to use the supplied sleeve that came with the coilover because it's the proper size to fit snugly on the diameter of the shaft on the shock. And you also have to utilize the washer at the bottom and reuse the one that came with the car at the top. Reason for that is, if we don't have this, and we just do that, and the car goes through a bump, You see where the bushing is? This whole thing can go right through the top and it doesn't hold it. So we use the washer to hold the bushing. Let's go ahead and get it on the car. All right, I'm trying to position you here in a manner that we can see both the threads and the cup here. I've got this with the shock bottomed all the way out, which I know is not the right adjustment, so you can see the difference. Right now, the spring has tension on it. That's called preload. I'm gonna try to set this up to have 0 preload while the axle itself, the beam, right, is at full droop, meaning that this is all the way down with no weight on it. To do that, I'm going to loosen this, turn it counterclockwise, and it will drop the beam. I will do that until I start to see just a little bit of play right here between the cup and the body, or the adjuster and the spring. And then after I start seeing a little play, then I'm going to tighten it 1 full rotation, or just enough so that the spring's not bouncing around. So let's go ahead, loosen that up. You see there's still tension on it. I apologize if the camera's a little wiggly. Now we're getting a little bit. Okay, I would say that's about good. I'm gonna do another rotation or two so you can see the difference. See, that's too much play. So we're gonna tighten. Tighten a little more. Tiny bit more. That's about good there. And you can feel the tension on here as you're tightening on a brand new set. On a used set, it might not be as noticeable. And then what you can also do is to measure side to side to make sure that your measurements are equal. I go from top of thread to bottom here, make sure that those match. Now, not all cars are equal, not all beams are equal. So just because your measurements are exactly the same side to side, doesn't mean that the car will sit or ride the same side to side. So it's more important for that to be sort of the same as an initial measurement before you get the car on the ground and you see exactly what kind of tweaks you need to make on every corner. Also, while I'm doing this, the bottom bolt that holds the shock is loose, as is the bushing here that holds the trailing arm, or sorry, the rear beam to the chassis. That just allows everything to have full range of motion and settle where it needs to be a lot easier. We will tighten those and torque them once final adjustments have been done. Now that the car is off the lift, we are going to try to set the suspension a little bit before we take it outside and take a good look at it. And what I like to do for that is, other than rolling it back and forth, give me a second while I use the hood prop here, I like pushing on the strut itself and give the suspension a couple good bounces on each corner and make sure that the spring is seated and doing what it's supposed to do. Don't push on the fender or the headlight or the bumper or the hood. These things are paper mache. Like, they bend so easily. These cars don't crash well. They're very thin. They're certainly econo cars. You want to put your hand and your weight on the strut tower. On the rear, you can open up the back door and put your weight right here on the pillar, and then like that, just kind of jump on the car a little bit. That should be enough to get the rear to set. Do that on both sides, and then we'll take it outside, take a good look at it. This thing is looking mean with the wheel setup and the ride height and the bus that's being extremely loud in the background. But yeah, I like it. I think that the side view profile is pretty awesome on this thing. I got the side skirt fairly even. We're about to take some measurements and make sure. This is a terrible test, but kind of how I do it. A finger there, a finger there. It's not the most mathematical precise measurement, but it should get you in the ballpark. So what I'm going to do now is measure just not like the front of the side skirt, but like just here and right here to the ground on both sides. Make sure it's even. Make sure you're on even ground when you're doing this also. Man, this bus is just ruining my shot. And then also the pickup points, like right underneath where it's reinforced, so you've got like that double section of metal right there. We're going to do measurements from that to the ground also, and make sure that that's pretty even. So let me go ahead and do that. All right, we're going to do the measurement now that the car's on level ground, and I'm going to do one right here, and I'm going to do one right there. We'll measure the other side so I can compare. What I'm using is a straight edge. This is just a metal ruler, and then I like having a measuring tape that has a little bit more finite measurement. It really helps to have centimeter on there, just because it's smaller, easier to read measurement. I know for all you non-US boys, you're gonna go, what the hell's an inch? Yeah, we don't know either. So let me show you how I do this measurement real quick. I'm gonna grab the ruler and I'm gonna set it flat up against the side skirt, and then we're gonna grab the tape. We're gonna go like this. It helps to have it on the other side right there. You see how it's right at the 4, so it's right at 140 millimeters. That matches the other side, and then we're going to do the back. Here on the back side, I'm going to try to bring it a little bit closer so you can see exactly what I'm doing. We're going to put this guy right up on there. We're going to measure with this guy right up on there, and this is reading right up to 150. So it's 10 mil more than the front, meaning that the car is currently very, very slightly raking forward like this. The front is very slightly lower than the rear is. I'm actually okay with that. I think a little rake is okay. You don't want to go crazy with it. But especially because I do plan on doing a full audio system in this, that is going to add some weight to the rear. And the rear does compress a lot more than the front generally does, just because of softer spring rates. I'm okay with that. So I'm going to go ahead, bring the car back in, lock everything for the suspension, and then we're going to take it for a quick test drive. I've got all the suspension components tightened up. I've got the wheels torqued, but before we can take it on a test drive, we got two small things to do. One, let's throw a mirror on this. I'm just going to put the stock one back on for the time being, just so I can see while I'm driving. And two is set the dampening adjustment. Now, this all the way back, and then that first click, that's one. These coilovers in particular have 32 clicks. How I like to start, this is very up to you, how the roads are by you, what kind of driving you're doing, your tire setup, spring rates, all personal preference. How I like to start is 1/3 of the way up from soft and adjust from there. If the car's riding too harsh, it's too bouncy, go down a little bit. If it's too soft and you need something a little bit more aggressive for the kind of driving you're going, go up a little bit. So 1/3 of 32, if I can math, will be roughly 10 clicks. So we'll go ahead and give it, I think I'm going to do 12 in the front and 10 in the rear. Start there and see how it goes. So this is all the way back. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. Same thing on this side. We'll go all the way back. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. And then I'll do the rear. We are test driving the coilovers. You might be able to see that don't have a door panel on because I threw that mirror on real quick and it's going to come back off. Got you on a chest camera just for this quick test ride. You're going to hear a horrendous noise coming out of the transmission. The brakes on the car are still super sketch. The clutch doesn't grab where it should. There's a lot of work to be done on this thing, but we'll get there. So far, coilovers ride great. I am going to have to make a little bit of clearance just because the tires are very aggressive. So I'm going to have to make some clearance with the fender liners. But the suspension feels fantastic. I have it on a terrible alignment. The car's kind of all over the road. I didn't even use toe plates yet. So it's kind of fighting itself. The steering wheel's not straight. But, I mean, I think it feels awesome. Other than, you know, everything I just described. So I'm pretty excited to get this car even more dialed. I'm going to have to put it away for just a little bit and finish some other stuff before we get back into doing some larger projects on the car. But I have the clutch ready to go. I've got all the transmission components ready to go. I'm going to do brakes on this thing. We're going to do a full exhaust system. We're going to do all of the hybrid racing components on the car. So all of the stuff. We obviously have to take it to get in alignment. There's still a good chunk of change left to do on the car. But I'm excited to get there. We're going to be turboing this car maybe sooner than later. We'll see how that goes. Yeah, we're going to do a bunch of cosmetic mods still, interior stuff. We've got those RSX seats that are going to go in here that I'm super pumped about. It's going to be a big upgrade in comfort and looks too. I think that they look great because they're like that special edition 0506 cloth interior. But yeah. Oh crap! The brakes are at the floor and they don't do a whole lot. So sketchy. Not too bad. Not too bad. I'm taking this route that's fairly bumpy. I don't know how much of that you can see from this angle, but it feels pretty good. Even with that, like, very shot in the dark dampening adjustment that we did just before the test drive, I think it feels pretty all right. I'll make sure this is a pretty narrow spot and nobody else is coming around the corner. But I'm pretty happy with these. I think these are going to be a great set of street track coilovers. It's not super bouncy. I think I could go down a couple of clicks in the rear right now just to make it a little bit more compliant. Where the case ports are definitely very, very soft. Oh my goodness, you can hear the salt all over. I'm sorry, car. We got some late rain last night that turned to ice this morning, so maybe today was not the best day to take out a car that is stupid clean like this is, but I promise I'll put it on the lift and get all the salt off it. Oh, I'm sorry, car. Make sure these dogs don't jump out in front of me. You can hear that awful bearing sound. Don't yet know if it's going to be a input shaft bearing or if it's going to be a horrendous throwout bearing, but I got both and differential bearings to put that LSD in that I'm actually picking up later today. So yeah, we're doing pretty well as far as progress. I've been lining up all my ducks so I can get them all shot down in a row. We've got some big stuff happening this year, as you guys might have just seen by the announcement that I'm now officially working with Hybrid and DC Sports. So I'll have links in the description for that, and also I'll be making a video to talk a little bit more about that announcement later. But yeah, let's get back to the shop and close this one out. And that about does it for this one. That is how you install coilovers on a divorce setup, like on a Fit. Showed you some of the adjustments that I like to make for a comfortable street setup. I think that as I drive the car more, I will fine-tune those dampening settings just to make sure everything's exactly where I want it for comfort and know what I like both for street and for track, and make note of that. But yeah, I'm really pumped to get this thing on track, get this thing finished up and drive it every day on the street, eventually get rid of my black car and have this be the new improved daily. So stay tuned for all the stuff that we just talked about that's coming on the channel. There will be a ton of content on this car in the near future. I'm going to set it aside and get some other little things here done so that I can then focus my energy mostly on this car. I need to finish up Danny's car that's here in the background and some other projects. But I'll have some smaller videos coming up. I'm going to be doing a 51R battery setup on this, so that is something that has been highly requested that will be coming up. And some other little bits here and there while I wait to do the larger projects like the transmission, clutch, and all that. But yeah, thank you so much for sticking around. If you have any questions, as always, drop it in the comments. Let me know how I can help you out. But I got some work to get done, so that'll do it for this one. I'll see you on the next one.